Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Hi. Thank you for joining me today. So I'll repeat myself. So the topic of my session today is about history of human interaction. I think that's a very important knowledge we as UX designers should have, but it often missed. And we usually just don't talk about it and don't research where the original interaction patterns came from. Think about mathematicians, right? They don't just remember formulas, right? They know how where they originated from, how they derived, so they can improve on them. I think the same way history of interaction can help us provide more context to what we use, because without that knowledge of where the pattern originated from, we can just copy it. We cannot really improve on it or change it, you know. And the gap of knowledge is understandable because it's not easy. Because it's not easy to find that information. There's no magic book that has all of the interaction patterns in it, all of the history of human interaction in it. Most of the stuff we are encountering is from a digital age, from the beginning of ergonomics and from beginning of UX design, but we don't have that rich knowledge about the experience from people from different centuries. And those books that we can find that will teach us about that usually would be written by historians for historians. So it's also not really easy to read as well. For example, if you start to search for computer history, right, you'll receive all kinds of information. It's highly known history. But with easy Google search, you probably would not be able to find the information that actually the Boolean language that's used in computers was inspired by ancient Chinese text, the Book of Changes. As you can see here, the author himself mentioned this book. And this information will not just pop up when you Google about the history of computers. And this is a good example how knowing the history, knowing the previous interaction, knowing previous experiences people have could lead to innovative thinking, to innovative ideas. In the past 2 years, I'm writing about the evolution of human interaction, the inspiration from history. And I think what I'm noticing is that we usually have two distinct types of progression that drives the creation of new interaction patterns. It usually would be either human needs that drive the new interaction pattern, or it will be slowly driven by the new technology. Of course, it's kind of combination of both, because human needs also feed on new technology and improve on it the same way new technology feeds on human needs. But you can see in different inventions different influences. So studying interaction history shows us a new perspective. It creates insight into the progression of human interaction. We can look at the history of a button, for example. Button is a fairly recent invention. So creation of the button is kind of hard to pinpoint. There is different inspiration behind it, and everyone kind of have different ideas of where it started. But it for sure was more popular during the digital age. And if we look at the devices that were before digital age, you will hardly see any buttons in it. So as example, mechanical machine here and analog machine here, right? So you'll see even something that's play button now was the knob and slides. So mechanical devices primarily employ gears, levers, and handles, while analog devices relied on knobs and sliders. It's mostly due to the technology restraints, not as much of the human's needs of having those specific elements to do any kind of action. It was mostly because of the technology that was restricting them. The same way is the button. Button was a technological progression since it served an on-off switcher for circuits, right? So it just was something someone came up because it was convenient to switch off and switch on for circuits. So thinking about it now, does it make a lot of sense to bring that bring that interaction pattern of the button into the digital world that's much more advanced than it was before? While that's not a bad thing that we still bring in the bottom into our modern world, because we really were trying to save that recognition, because people recognize button, and usage of it made it easier to teach them new interfaces. Does the following established patterns hold us back? Definitely not. Should we reevaluate patterns influenced by older technology? I think we should. I think that's why it's important to study history as well, because that's when we can identify the point in time where we think, oh, well, this pattern really just really was created just because of that technology. There is not a lot of importance at that time was for it, for user needs, and should we still follow it through our modern times? That's not to say that we should remove buttons. I'm just saying that we should really think carefully about the patterns that we're using, and looking at their history really helps with that. We can really observe this also with the keyboards, right? It's the same, like with the buttons, keyboards, following the same old pattern of typewriters that we put into our mobile phones, even though we know now that there is a lot of problem with typing on our mobile phone. When we try to type really fast, we make a lot of errors. Others have problems with it because it's very small and stuff like that. And you can see that nowadays people do try to change those patterns. They employ new technology into typing, like gesture typing or voice typing, that are really using that smart technology that we have now, and not just employing like old patterns. In contrast to that, we can talk about layouts as an interaction pattern. So layouts as an interaction pattern is extremely old. Since people began to write, there was some kind of layouts there. Even in clay tablets, it's in here. So even in like ancient China, in ancient Egyptian writing, you can see some kind of white space use, content grouping, visual enhancements, all of that you can see throughout the history. And that just should tell you how natural for us is that interaction pattern. That even without a lot of prior knowledge, without like specific training for a design, for a graphic design as well, they still come up with some kind of layouts. And you might think, well, of course they come up, but I do find a lot of surprising stuff that were at some point invented that I thought they're just given. It just always existed. But most of the stuff always get invented. So if you look at that pattern, if you look at the layouts of interaction patterns, because layouts is how we interact with the page, it's how we scan in the page, right? And look at the button, you can clearly see that one is definitely forever will be there. Of course, it's hard to say forever, so no one knows, but well, it survived so far, so it survived through a lot of ages and centuries. So that's where I think the learning of the history is important, because we can see those differences in patterns, and we can see where they came from. And we also can get a lot of inspiration from the historical like documents that we uncover, the same way as I said about the Boolean logic, right? He came up with it from also ancient text. So the different approach I took with researching ER and VR history, I wasn't that much concerned about the progression of technology for this article. I was more thinking about natural needs of humans that led to that technology, to lead to VR and AR. And in that, I started thinking like VR and AR mostly is all about like entertainment, extending reality, seeing something more, or helpful contextual information, right? And when I was thinking about this, first thought that came to my mind is shadow play. And turns out it's also like very ancient art form that's actually was extremely hard to find any information on. That's like returning to the point that it's not easy if you want to find that information. It's not easy. And I think it would be really helpful if we pay more attention to that, if we, put more researchers into researching that and see the progression of human interaction. So with shadow play, it's really hard to find that information. A lot of that maybe due to religious first shadow plays were probably religious acts more than entertainment. But even in shadow play, I kind of found something that really connects it to VR and AR, and I think it's because we can consider shadow play as a first like projection that ever existed, right? Because they used light, they extended reality, so we still can see that similar needs that are met with shadow play as same with VR and AR. After that, I went into researching about optical illusion, which I also thought like in a similar manner with shadow play, extending of reality, maybe seeing more than is there. And there's some few very interesting example here you can check out after our session if you want. And that also led me to connection to VR and VR in more technical way, because the interest of optical illusion, like the whole phenomena of optical illusion, what people in ancient times in 18th and 19th century were curious about, as to how come people can trick your eyes. And that started some researches for philosophers, for scientists about the optics, which then led to stereoscopy, which is basically like the beginning of 3D images. And that would be used in goggles like these ones that are like for viewing 3D images, like feeling immersed in some world that doesn't exist there, right? And so here you can see clear connection to VR and AR. And what I think was helpful in this research for me is finding that that need that was always there, that kind of led to that new technology as VR and VR, because we might sometimes think, oh, well, VR and AR is just a new technology. Like there is the new technology appeared, so they decided, oh, well, that would be fun. But actually, human needs, user needs were always there for that. And some kind of form of it always existed, you know. So that's why I think it's very important to study history, because we get all of those perspectives, we get all of that. We also can receive a lot of information about how people use the devices, how they perceive the devices. So I think it helps us to grow as a designers. And grow as a designers, and you know, no matter are we ready for that or not, are we against that or not, the new patterns will emerge, and I hope we are prepared for it. We understand how the progression is going, and I hope we can influence it, you know, not just making the design happen, but actually influencing suggestion ideas. So if someone has any questions, I can answer those. If not, you can check out my articles. You can check out my articles. I also have the link on some of them that leads to like PDF, that combination of my 3 of mine articles, so you can check it out and look at the more stuff there. So someone asked, Jack asked, how would you turn the inspiration from ancient arts into real UX product? So as I provide the example, like first one, it's already, you can see it even in real life happening before you. So let me just share my screen again. So the ancient writing from Chinese book inspired the Boolean logic, right? So I think a lot of it really can inspire you to create something new, because imagine, so we live in this earth for like 90, 100 years, for example, as average human being. But all the knowledge we have prior to that, like all the trials and errors they have, I think if we dive into it, we can really learn a lot, and we can really come up with new ideas. Technology is evolving. So first it was just like touch screens, right? And now we see AI coming into play, which will be mostly conversational, or maybe not even that, you know, maybe it will change to something new. And in, for example, conversational interfaces, we can learn a lot from ancient history. We can learn a lot from previous ways. As another example, arts of memory is still used, even though it was created in, I think it was 3rd century BC. It's still widely used. It's still talked about on TED Talks and everything. You know, it's you can really see those ancient knowledge still coming into play. Okay. How did history inspire UX design? So if you think about regular research, right, that's also something that inspires design, like researching users, learning about the users. We know that UX is mostly like behavior, right? So we need to understand human behavior. And when you study history, you start to notice that a lot of behavioral things not really changing. You know, it's not really changing, or even that progression when it's changed. I think it's important to understand to be better UX designers. because we're all about how humans act, how humans learn, how humans progress, you know. And it's actually really insightful. So for one of my next articles, I thought dive in a little bit more for manuals. I did an article about manuals, and I already wrote a little bit about how they were made, how the difference they have. So if you look at like first manual that ever existed, which was pretty early, pretty recent, I mean, it's written like a book, like fictional book. Like author talks about his life, how he thinks something would, would work. And it's extremely hard to read. And when you read that, you understand, oh, that's why we have manuals that we have now, right? And also, if you research that progression of manuals, you learn that, oh, so at some point, they barely even use any images. And then they change into that, like highlighting elements, writing numbers and saying, oh, that's number represents that. And also like how they structure the layout of the books, that's also changed. And then you go and look into our current year, and you'll see that we don't even use that much of a books anymore. We just use small booklets that will lead you to online guide, that will like online guide you through the interface. And I think when a lot of designers like start to build those guide interface, they don't really think about how manuals used to work. They think, oh, we should forget about that and like concentrate on completely new way we're doing guides now. Even though we still can bring a lot of important info, like still can get a lot of important information, a lot of like insights from those books, from those manuals, because that also went from for a long time, and it was a teaching process for all of them. And I'm sure there's a lot of insight. I hope that answered your question. And if there is not much other questions, I'll be finishing my session. Thank you so much for joining me today. I was really surprised. A lot of people came in, and thank you for support. I know I'm a bit of an awkward speaker, but thank you so much.